I am here to expose some things that you aren't supposed to know, that no one is supposed to know. There are things going on behind the scenes that are being kept so quiet and so protected that the powers that be would start a nuclear war just so that their enemies don't have a clue and aren't able to get their hands on them and use them against them or for their own gain. A nuclear war wouldn't even faze them soon enough. It really is just a matter of time. You're wondering who the hell I am and what I am even talking about, but I will explain everything in due time. I have a few things to share with you, and as soon as it is sent, I will be going into hiding. I already have a plan. Transport is already set up, and I will soon disappear into a country where they cannot get to me, and where I will be nobody again. They won't get me, and I won't be extradited, because if it comes to that, the information I possess will be of such high value that they will protect me at all costs. That is the worst case scenario. The best case is that I live out my life as a nobody and a pauper, and that is good enough for me. Who am I? I originally served in the military for a few years and worked the hardest that I could until I was scouted and approached and offered a much more prestigious position at an underground military base. From there, I did more intense training and then got the role I am here to tell you about. It sounds like fantasy, but I trained for and was stationed on a US military base on the moon. No bullshit. I will try and Greentext as much as I can. I joined the military as soon as I hit age 18, fresh out of education. It was a dream of mine ever since I was a little kid. None of my family members had ever served, but a kid that I was friends with at school always used to tell me about the amazing operations that his father was involved with and all the cool shit he got up to. Decided at a young age that no matter what, I was going to join up. Lucky me, I get shipped off pretty quickly to fight in the Iraq War. Saw the most fucked up shit you could possibly imagine. Slaughtering civilians, blowing up protected buildings and desecrating them, beating civilians for information and sometimes even just for fun. Some of our soldiers would beat the fuck out of enemies that we had captured, even if they had surrendered peacefully. They would take them back and waterboard them and torture them until they gave up whatever they wanted to hear, even if it wasn't true. They wouldn't just do this to the soldiers, they would do this to women and child soldiers and whatever else you could think of. So many war crimes that just got covered up. I also took part in operations over in Syria and even ended up in Libya at one point. Saw a lot of horrible shit, and I was very lucky to be alive. After a long service, I started to get noticed and was approached by a couple of individuals who told me that they represented a more specialized branch of the military and were looking for someone with my expertise in combat and training, as well as my medical skills that I had displayed in the field. They were offering a lot of pay and were going to get me away from fighting in shitholes, so I didn't see how I could ever refuse their offer. I was transferred to an underground military base where they told me they were going to be providing me with an intensive training course and would be expanding my medical knowledge before they would be shipping me out onto a classified mission that was due to launch within a year's time. I had to sign countless NDAs before they would fully reveal to me the extent of the operation and was sworn to full secrecy under pain of death. I had almost no family members aside from my aunt and uncle who raised me in place of my junkie dad and my mom who passed away during childbirth. Aside from them, I had pretty much no one and no obligations at all, so when I was told that I would be living on base, it was not a problem for me. They laid the operation out on the table and told me that they were launching a military initiative on the moon. They had apparently discovered some craters as well as some tunnels and wanted to launch a thorough research operation, and so were preparing to bring in more crew. They had a base that had been set up for a number of years, but with minimal people and supplies. Now, normally astronauts train for around 2 years before shipping out, but they told me that they wanted to streamline the process to begin the operation much quicker, so they decided that as a compromise, they would bring in personnel who had many years of military training and experience, which would hopefully make up for it. So, We had a 1-year crash course, essentially. The base wasn't anything incredibly special, aside from it being located underground. This wasn't set up on home soil. They wanted this shit out of the way. They had it located underground in Panama, which sounds unbelievable considering the history, and that is exactly the reason why it is there. You think the US actually gave a flying fuck that Noriega was trafficking drugs and organized crime? He was a huge asset gone rogue that was an easy scapegoat for an invasion, which would allow them to place a lovely puppet in charge that would provide them with whatever the US needed. Noriega was the perfect cover story. The new puppet ruler would allow the US to conduct any and all research there and shift everything away from where it could be exposed, and nobody would suspect a thing. Of course, the original intention was not for this operation in particular, but it was something that was eventually devised. I never witnessed any secret research or secret weapons hiding in this underground military base, or anything else unusual. I trained my ass off for the full year, and we shipped out. This moon landing was obviously classified and kept strictly off the records, but a rocket launching into space is something extremely hard to hide, which is why we didn't launch from Panama. It's why we didn't launch from the US or any countries with close relations to us. We launched with China. The perfect cover story. No one in the US would ever receive any news of it if we didn't want to, and any leakages would be seen purely as a conspiracy or propaganda, while the citizens of China would have nothing to question and would not be informed. You ever hear about Chang'e Free? Yeah, we went up at the same time. In exchange, China would receive parts of our research, and we would allow them to send scientists with us to conduct their own research and exploration. Nothing a little lunar accident could fix if we needed it to happen. The journey there and the landing all went without a single hiccup. We were planned to be up there for around 9 months in total, and then returning to share what we found. There were already a few crew members up there awaiting our arrival who would be traveling back not long after us because they had already stayed in space for way longer than any human should. The plan was for them to pass on the research and current projects, and then we would take over. It didn't go entirely to plan. I'm going to Greentext a few things about the base that was shared with me that I think are very crucial, and then I will tell you about the tunnel that they found in one of the craters, which provided us with something very unusual. Bear with me, because all of this is important. The base itself was built into a crater of the moon, and was really something to behold. Outwardly, the scale of it was not too massive, but it was the verticality of the base that was really interesting. They had chosen to build it into this specific crater for a few very important reasons. A few other of the new crew members and I got a tour, and one of the first stops was to descend deeper into the crater. You would not fucking believe what I saw. Underneath this base on the moon was an honest-to-God pyramid. I'm not talking Pyramid of Giza level or anything like that. If you have ever seen the old grainy photo that was taken during the Apollo 17 space mission, it was like that, except it was buried almost in an underground cavern underneath this crater. I always thought it was either fake or that the camera was messed up and it just looked like a weird shape was on the picture. After seeing all of this, I am half convinced that the photo is real and was accidentally released along with all of the other photos that were taken on the mission, and NASA played it off, knowing that only the outcasts of society, who no one would listen to, would not believe them. I had one of the most senior crew members working there, giving me a rundown on the thing, and what he told me was strange. He told me that the pyramid made no sense. He told me that even though you could enter it and explore what was inside, something about it just didn't seem right. Like, it obviously looked like a man-made structure, like the Egyptian pyramids, but who could have possibly made it, and why would they bury it underground? How would they even gain the materials to do something like this, as well as the manpower? And most important of all, what purpose did it serve? The scientists did some tests and investigations and ran every kind of test that they could think of, and they couldn't figure out the exact material that it was built out of. It was similar to stone, but not exactly. The mass and the texture was off, and it didn't behave in the same way. Inside the pyramid itself, there were sections of it that had heat pockets that felt like you were standing next to the sun, but the material itself, when on its own, gives off no heat at all. That wasn't the only strange thing about the structure. It was kind of hard to focus on, I guess. Like, imagine you were looking out of your peripheral vision, not at the furthest reach of it, but about the midway point. You can make out most of the details, and you know what is there, but if you try too hard to see, then it strains your vision, and it gives you a headache. That is exactly what it was like, trying to look at this thing. It made your head spin, and multiple people had reportedly thrown up or passed out after looking at the thing, or being in its presence for too long. The scientists gave me a guided tour of the pyramid. The scale of it was impressive, much bigger than what you would expect when looking at the structure from the outside. It was honestly quite difficult to get my head around how it worked. The corridors all seemed to intertwine at random points that didn't make sense, and made it incredibly easy to get lost since the whole place looked very similar. There weren't any strange markings on any of the walls or any writing, but they did uncover a couple of artifacts from the pyramid that they were currently testing on. The pyramid had a few different hollowed out rooms that the artifacts sat in throughout it. They were all sitting atop small plinths in each room, like it was being displayed. The plinths were kind of like the Washington Monument, except instead of a point at the top, it was concave with a space for the artifact to sit, and obviously much smaller than the Washington Monument. I am around 5'9", and it sat up at almost head height up to me. There were etchings into each of the plinths, but it didn't look like any kind of language. There was no pattern to the etchings, and looked more like claws had been stuck into each and dragged down them slowly. The artifacts I can't really tell you much about, as they are still being studied, but I can describe them and share as much as we know. One of them looked like an ordinary sphere, made out of some kind of bronze material. It was almost completely weightless when we measured the mass of the thing, which suggested it was hollow, but any attempts to penetrate the outer shell had been completely unsuccessful. They had tried everything, short of dropping a nuclear bomb on top of it. Another one was kind of like a hunting sphere, but longer with a red tip that was oddly shaped and is difficult to describe. Again, the metal it was tipped with was something that had never been seen on Earth before, but the handle was made out of regular wood. There were a couple more which were quite small and insignificant, which I don't really have any details to share about them. That is pretty much everything I can tell you about the pyramid. There weren't any ancient traps or anything like that in there, but the artifacts and the effect the pyramid had on our site was something of massive interest. If we could figure out how it worked, then imagine if we could apply it to fighter jets, to stealth bombers. Imagine if we could apply it to actual fucking rockets and nuclear weapons. I think our planet would be in grave danger. I have one more thing to share that I was taught about as part of my training. While I do have a lot of medical skills and did have a personal interest in studying things like biology, this was beyond me, so take my explanations with a grain of salt, as this is just to help you understand. They had a section in the base back above ground with a large lab. They were researching the atmosphere, the soil, anything you could think of to try and see what they could discover. Obviously, terraforming the moon would not be on the cards without significant advancements in technology, but every little thing helps, right? Anyway, so the soil on the moon is made up of a few things, like rock chips, and this thing that is only found on the moon, which was coined as agglutinates, which is a little hard to describe without writing a formal essay. So, you all know about the world-famous moon landing, which was Apollo 11. The moon mission directly after it, Apollo 12, was interesting for a few reasons. The main reason is that when the crew returned to Earth, they had found a particular strain of bacteria named Streptococcus mitis on the lens of the camera of the Surveyor 3 probe, which they had sent up 2 years prior to their mission. The likely explanation was that it was contaminated at some point when returning to Earth, because the sterilization protocols were nowhere near as rigorous, but NASA and the US government very silently believed otherwise. They could not find evidence of it anywhere else on the moon. Of course, the entire moon has not been explored, so it is very possible that it is somewhere. But here is the kicker. They found something else. They found it only in the soil in the direct vicinity of this pyramid. Let me say that I am not a scientific expert, and what I say isn't actual fact, but just to give you an idea of how they told me it works. Essentially, these bacteria that they had found had some kind of special regenerative properties that they were able to observe. Now, all bacteria can regenerate themselves, but the extraordinary thing was when they exposed small rodents, such as mice, to these bacteria. It wasn't perfect, but the mice were able to regenerate mild injuries, such as incisions, at incredibly advanced rates. Not instantly, but within a few hours, they were almost fully healed. That isn't all. With exposure to enough of the bacteria, and with enough time for it to build up in their bodies, the mice were able to partially regrow their limbs. It takes a few days, and obviously does not work for fatal injuries, but the main problem is that the immune system is able to completely fight off the bacteria before the regeneration process is complete, and once that is done, the mouse is now immunized, and the bacteria is less effective at helping them to regenerate. They never tested it on humans while I was there, but that was the key obstacle that they were hoping to overcome, so that it could be used on humans who are amputees, or applying it in combat to prevent as many casualties. That is the last big revelation that they told me about, and now I will tell you about the tunnel that we explored before I sign off permanently. I'm sorry that I cannot stay and answer questions. It is too big of a risk for me. Bear in mind, these events and revelations took place over a period of 9 months and did not all happen in the same day. Prior to our arrival, another tunnel had been discovered in a crater approximately around 2 miles due west of the location of our base. One of the objectives assigned to us was to take a very small team, just 4 of us, into this tunnel and figure out what we could find. 3 military personnel, headed by a man who I was not familiar with, but was an Iraq veteran and higher up in the food chain than me, alongside one researcher who we would be escorting to collect samples of the soil. If there were more structures like the pyramid and more bacteria on the planet, then they wanted to know about it ASAP. The trek was hard, despite it only being 2 miles. No amount of training can really prepare you for just how much energy it takes to walk in such a heavy spacesuit with everything around you resisting your every move. The base we were on did not have many weapons, but we were provided with a few to be used in emergencies only. We took 1 rifle with us, an RK-95, equipped with a bayonet at the end, purely as a precaution, and was held by the Iraq vet that was leading the exploration mission. Just a note, before any know-it-alls try and tell me that this is fake, because guns don't work in space, I suggest you do some research. You won't be having full-scale warfare and blasting people full auto, but you can shoot a couple of rounds, no problem. Visibility was relatively clear, and we were able to spot the tunnel from a distance. The crater was decently deep, and we had to be careful with our descent. The tunnel looked to be very obviously man-made, like someone had attempted to dig a mine shaft while leaving out any kind of support beams to protect from a collapse. The direction of the tunnel was also pretty irregular. It descended for a while before taking a strange swirling path east, and then continuing the decline. After a while of walking, it eventually opened up into a decently sized cavern that left us awestruck. The ceiling of it was quite high, with stalagmites and stalactites all around. There weren't any man-made structures that we could see, but there was what looked like to me a small alcove at the opposite end of the cavern, with what looked to be more etchings made there into the cavern wall. The researcher stayed with the Iraq vet and was attempting to gather whatever she was looking for to analyze, and me and the other guy made our way towards the alcove. The alcove itself looked to be naturally formed, and these etchings were quite big this time and stretched almost the whole length down it. Again, for reference, the alcove stretched a few feet above my head. They were similar to the ones inside the pyramid that were etched into the artifact plinths, but they weren't exact. These ones were more diagonal, and the size of the etchings, in terms of area, were bigger. We took pictures as best as we could to try and really capture the scale, but it was difficult to. Not only that, but for some reason, the alcove was starting to give me a headache, just like the pyramid did. The only difference this time is that it wasn't like looking out of my peripheral vision. My vision was perfect, but after a minute or so, my eyes started to become strained and tired, and I had to look away. There was another passage on the side of the cavern that we were on now, but the researcher had finished collecting her samples, and the Iraq vet made the decision that it was too risky and had too many unknown quantities. He was completely right. We got exactly what we came for, and it was time to leave before we started running into oxygen issues. We made the right choice in the end, because we started to hear some weird sounds coming from the direction of that tunnel. They were faint, like they were echoing from the very end of a shaft, but we could just about make them out. It wasn't words, or really anything that we could properly describe. It was just noises, echoing faintly. Because of the echo, it was hard to describe, but it was a very abrupt sound, kind of like a plosive sound, but slightly different. It was quite deep and bassy too, but that is all we got, because we left after that. We never ventured back in the time that I was stationed there. It was decided by command that too many variables were at play, and they preferred to assign us to other tasks. That is about all I can tell you in all honesty, X. I hope it was worth the risk. You may think me dumb for telling you this, but things are starting to progress in ways that I do not like. I only did the one deployment and was on the back burner for a while because being up there for so long seriously took a toll on my body. It really isn't what it used to be, and I had a longer recovery time than most, so they opted to send other people back up in my place. I lived on the base in Panama for quite a while to aid with my recovery, and I was kept in the loop of advancements in case I was ready to ship out once my turn came back around. After that, I was given leave and told to rest and focus on my recovery. If things continue on their current trajectory, then devastating things are coming. I'm sorry that I cannot stick around for questions, but I hope I was able to provide at least some insight. Goodbye, X. Hey X, I have a story for you. I can't clearly remember when my grandpa, R.I.P., actually told me about this. The memory kinda popped out sometime after he died. Early 40s. Grandpa was about 10 at the time. Small village in southern Sardinia. Poor as fuck. To this day the poorest region in Italy. People used to live in houses made of landini, basically a sun-dried mixture of clay mud and hay. Some medieval type shit. Grandpa is playing with some friend in the streets. It is getting late, and there is a curfew. Time to get home. Grandpa decides to take the long way home, as he was in the mood for a walk. At some point, he hears someone calling his name faintly, almost like a whisper. Freaks him out, so he starts walking faster. He hears it again, this time louder and clearer, in the voice of a man without any kind of accent. This is important because us Sardinians have a very strong accent, and if you know about it, it is immediately noticeable. Grandpa also used to have a unique, ancient Roman-inspired name that his father made up, so there was no mistaking it, yet there was no one in sight. It was also getting darker by the minute. Grandpa is literally shitting his pants at the moment. A strong smoke smell hits his nose, stronger and more pungent than a cigarette. The man calls again, this time followed by a whistle. Right here, Grandpa. Finally, leaning on a short stone wall, Grandpa saw what he described as a distinct-looking man. Clean-shaven, slicked-back hair, smoking from a pipe, wearing leather shoes and a long black coat. He was holding a cane in his left hand and a leather pouch in his right. As I said, At the time, people were still pretty much medieval peasants in the region, so that must have looked absurdly out of place. "Come closer," said the man. "No, you're going to kidnap me," Grandpa answered. "Absolutely not. I actually have a present for you," replied the man, as he showed Grandpa the contents of the leather pouch. The pouch was allegedly full of gold coins and jewels. Grandpa knows something must be off, yet he is also very tempted. "Come on, I'm gonna make you rich." Grandpa finally gives in and starts walking towards the gold. As he was getting closer, the men started to look off. He said what looked like leather shoes were actually goat-like hooves. What looked like a cashmere coat was actually made from black crow feathers. Also, his face looked like stretched out leather, and some mixture of black oil and dirty blood was oozing and dripping from his slicked back hair. His cane also turned into a hissing serpent, crawling in a spiral onto the man's arm. Grandpa was now standing in front of the demonic creature, paralyzed. Its breath smelled like a rotting corpse, set ablaze with motor oil. The stench probably worked like ammonia salts, and Grandpa miraculously snapped out of the terror, escaping just a moment before the demon grabbed him by the neck. He made it home running as fast as he could, without ever looking back, and praying over his panting breath. Despite all this, Grandpa was still thinking about the gold, and didn't sleep that night. Can't blame him, since he found himself eating boiled old leather shoe soles many times. People were that poor, yes. At about 4:30 a.m., he snuck out of the house and came back to the encounter place, looking for the bag. What he found was not what he expected though. He said he found a canvas sack full of dirt, worms, shit, and some pieces of coal. Up until the day he told me the story, Grandpa remained sure he actually met the devil himself and managed to escape from him. I grew up in a small village in Poland. Right next to my house was a narrow path. Sometimes farmers used it to reach their fields. That is where the path led, but it didn't happen often. They had better roads. That's why it was an ideal place to learn to ride a bike. Lots of space, secluded, grassy. I spent many summer mornings and afternoons there, riding back and forth. The story happened when I was 8. It was early July, a few days before my birthday. I took some snacks, water, and rode the path as usual. At first it was peaceful, but then I saw 2 dogs in front of me. It disturbed me because I recognized the dogs and I knew they were aggressive. They weren't that close, so I decided to slowly go away. To the left was private lands, so I couldn't just go there, and I couldn't just turn around and go home, because I didn't want to turn my back on the dogs. I knew that they would start chasing me if I did. I decided to turn to the right of the paths. For a while, I was still a bit scared. I kept looking back to see if they followed me, but they didn't. I focused on my surroundings. All around me were empty grasslands. No trees, no rivers, just dry grass stretching all the way to the distant forest. I thought it would be cool to ride there. I think it was around noon. I rode and rode, but the forest was not any closer. Suddenly I realized that I couldn't hear any sound. Just a moment ago, I heard birds and wind, but now everything was so still that it rang in my ears. The only sound I heard once or twice was some distant calling, and the air was very heavy and stifling. You would think that the storm was coming, but no. The sky was bright blue. Everything around was so unnaturally bright and hot. I felt as if something was after me, like I was in a trap, and the forest was still far away. The last thing I remember was looking at the sky. My parents found me in the evening. I would probably think it was just a heat stroke, but 3 things are odd. Parents found me lying really close to the forest, and I have no recollection of going so close. The forest was still far away in my last memory. Did someone move me there? The next thing is my bike. It was destroyed. Some parts were in the grassland, others in the forest, but the worst was the sense of dread that I had. Even after 16 years, I still feel a bit uneasy when the sun shines a bit too bright. Holy fuck, X. So, bear with me. This happened a few minutes ago, so I am still very spooked, and I'm writing this from my cistern. I was studying some shit for uni, and very often I go out on a walk on my property. I live in a bigger village, you can call it a small town, but people have land for agriculture and stuff. My property is pretty big, and it is on the base of a mountain. At the top property, I have a cistern for water. It's empty, so when it's very cold, I go inside. I have some old pillows, and I lay down or sit and smoke. On top of the cistern, you can see a very pretty view of the city. Anyway, I'm putting on my coat and get my cigs, and I tell my older brother that I am going on a walk. I go out on walks often, so it's nothing unusual. I ask him, wanna go hang out with me? He says he wants to watch a movie, so maybe tomorrow. I leave the house and start climbing up. From my house to the top of my property, it's like 500 meters. I go on top of the cistern, admiring the view, but it is crazy cold, so I don't want to hurt myself climbing down in the cistern with a ciggy in my hand. So I want to finish it and go inside. Keep in mind, I went hundreds of times on these walks and nothing happened. So I am almost finished with my ciggy. It's very calm. But then I hear footsteps that are human-like, but kinda weird. I am already in fight or flight mode, and I turn my head to the sound of the footsteps, and it's coming from above my property, opposite of my house. Then I hear a voice, it's my bro. It's something wrong with it. I can only see a figure, cause I was on my phone, and my eyes need to adjust. I'm kind of creeped out already. He stands there for a minute, and he tells me to get down. My eyes adjust to the dark, and I realize that this is not my brother. It's some weird creature. I can't tell the details, cause it's dark, but its body is weird. And then it screams. I throw my ciggy, and I jump inside the cistern, almost breaking my ankle, closing the hatch, and I can hear this thing screaming, and bashing the side of the cistern, and I almost shit myself. After a few minutes it stops. I am still so spooked to go out. I wanted to call my dad to get his gun, but he will think I'm a bitch. I'm still in the cistern, shitting my pants, and I don't know if the thing is gone. X. Did I encounter a European skinwalker?